Good evening, welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. When it comes to climate change, it appears we will not always have Paris. President Trump announced a short time ago the U.S. will withdraw from the agreement signed on to by President Obama. The move crosses off another item from candidate Donald Trump's campaign to-do list. And while the move has its supporters on Capitol Hill, in small business, in big business, in the states most affected, it has also enraged a cross-section of other leaders in politics, business, even religion. We start off with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts on the North Lawn tonight. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. President Trump today slammed the Paris Climate Accord as a bad deal for America, one that would give other countries an economic advantage over the United States, something he said as president he will not stand for.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
With the formality of the Rose Garden around him, President Trump today put the world and Congress on notice that the U.S. will only sign on to a deal that's good for America and good for American workers.
I'm willing to immediately work with Democratic leaders to either negotiate our way back into Paris under the terms that are fair to the United States and its workers, or to negotiate a new deal that protects our country and its taxpayers.
In a half-hour speech, President Trump outlined what he said would be the economic burden, expense, and job loss from staying in the Paris Accord. Reaction was swift. SpaceX Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who stands to gain from the subsidies contained in the Paris Agreement, resigned from White House advisory boards, tweeting, quote, "and departing presidential councils. Climate change is real. Leaving Paris is not good for America or the world." House Speaker Paul Ryan, on the other hand, praised the move in a statement saying, quote, "I commend President Trump for fulfilling his commitment to the American people and withdrawing from this bad deal." In Europe, leaders with whom President Trump met just last week all but mocked him.
Das denkt Herr Trump.
The Americans can't just get out of the agreement. Mr. Trump thinks that because he does not get close enough to the dossiers to comprehensively understand them.
Among the nations urging President Trump not to abandon the accord, Russia. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying today, quote, "President Putin signed this convention in Paris. Russia attaches great significance to it." At the same time, the White House moved to mend some fences with Russia, setting plans to return 2 Russian compounds on Maryland's eastern shore and near Oyster Bay, Long Island. The Obama administration ordered Russia to vacate the palatial estates as retaliation for the email hacking scandal back in December. And for the first time today, Russian President Vladimir Putin acknowledged that Russian hackers, whom Putin described as, quote, patriots, may have tried to influence the U.S. election in Donald Trump's favor, though he insisted there was no official government involvement.
If they are patriots, they start to contribute their opinions in order to fight against those who speak ill about Russia. Theoretically, it's possible. We don't engage in that on a state level.
With his move on the climate accord, President Trump today seemed to invigorate a base that had grown weary of a White House besieged with daily scandals. The president made no apology for pulling out of the Paris Accord, saying he was elected to represent people in places like Pittsburgh, not Paris. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. Let's get reaction now from the president's point man on the environment, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. Mr. Administrator, thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Brett.
I heard you in the Rose Garden, obviously supporting this move, talking about the benefits of it. For people who are skeptical about it and have problems with it, what do you tell them tonight?
That America has been leading on this issue even before Paris. We're at pre-1994 levels, and we're at pre-1994 levels on our CO2 footprint before Paris was ever entered into. In fact, from 2000 to 2014, we had an 18% reduction in our CO2 footprint. So the United States has nothing to be apologetic about with respect to our commitment to using technology, using innovation, using American ingenuity to address issues like CO2. What Paris represents, Brett, is a bad deal for this country. And the president, I think, really hit home today that he's going to have an America First strategy, not just in trade, not just in national security, not just in border security, but also in issues like the environmental agreements like Paris represents.
I know you've heard some of the reaction. It's been all over the board, but take a listen to some of it that we gathered late this afternoon.
It is a huge mistake, and future generations will look back on this day as one of the worst things that's happened in the 21st century.
We are going to lose millions of jobs for hard-working Americans because the president is going to honor a promise to the coal industry rather than the promise that he should be honoring to the rest of the world and to the future generations of Americans.
Every Chicagoan and Illinoisan who depends on Lake Michigan and our aquifers for safe, clean drinking water at risk because of Donald Trump's recklessness.
It's an extraordinary abdication of American leadership. He's made us an environmental pariah in the world, and I think it is one of the most self-destructive moves I've ever seen by any president in my lifetime.
Your reaction?
You know, what's interesting about those comments today is if you go back to when Paris was entered into by the nations across the globe, there were environmental groups here criticizing the deal because it didn't hold China accountable. It did not hold India accountable. The largest polluters in the world didn't have to take any steps until the year 2030. India, in the agreement, wasn't going to take any steps toward CO2 reductions until they received $2.5 trillion in aid before any positive response. We're already taking those steps, Brett. We have nothing to be apologetic about. We've led the world in CO2 reduction. We're going to continue to lead the world in CO2 reduction because of innovation and technology. What we ought to be focused upon is exporting what we know to places around the globe like China and India and helping them reduce CO2 emissions as opposed to setting targets in Paris that no one can meet. You know, what's interesting about this entire discussion is the targets that were set in Paris, the 26 to 28% reduction in greenhouse gases and CO2 emissions. The previous administration, President Obama, every action he took, the climate action agenda that he entered into, still fell 40% short of those targets. It was a failed deal to begin with, and we were spending $292 billion on one rule, the Clean Power Plan, in response to Paris.
But you had already dealt with the regulations by what you were doing administratively here. There are people who look at this accord and say it didn't have teeth, so the U.S. could do whatever it wanted to, and by not being a part of this now and being one of the three countries with Syria and Nicaragua, which didn't think this accord went far enough, and the U.S. outside of this deal, that we take ourselves away from the table as far as American leadership in the world. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, we're the United States. We don't lose our seat at the table, number one. We're already a part of the UNFCCC, which is the Climate Action Committee there at the UN. That seat is secure. But here's the deal. When you look at this situation with India and China and the rest, what people are not recognizing, this isn't about China suing the United States for getting out or India suing the United States for getting out. If you go back to 2016, there were environmental groups, law review articles that were written that said, now that we have Paris, it's the precursor to us using the court system in this country to compel regulatory response by the EPA to further drive away fossil fuel, drive away coal, while China and India continued building coal generation. So this was truly, the president did a courageous thing today. He truly put America's interests first and said, we're going to remain engaged on CO2 reduction. We're going to export what we know from innovation technology. We're going to make sure that we have an America First strategy, but we're not going to yield to a framework that was failed from the very beginning that put America second.
Now, I saw the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did an analysis of jobs potentially lost from adhering to all of the elements of the Paris Accord, but there were 25 plus companies that tried to lobby the administration to stay in, saying that it would lose jobs. And you heard that in that montage of Democrats, that by pulling out, it'll lose jobs. These are the companies on the screen.
What we know is that there was a contraction occurring in our energy sector jobs. There have been reports that showed a $2.5 trillion reduction in GDP over 10 years, up to 400,000 jobs, as you mentioned, by the U.S. Chamber study, and 200,000 of those jobs in the manufacturing sector. I mean, that's objectively measured. So these discussions about our inability to export green technology, I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, there were some that said, well, this also poses concerns with respect to national security and alliances there. You know, we've done this before, Brett. We pulled out of the Kyoto Protocol in 2001. If you go back and read in March and April of 2001, the criticism that was being levied against President Bush, you can read the comments from the German Chancellor. They're almost identical to the ones today.
What is the prospect of this president renegotiating, as he said?
Europe wanted this because it put us at an economic disadvantage. And the president has said, look, we're open to discussing this. We're open to discussing it. But we're not going to put America's interest for second in that negotiation. The president took care of the American citizen today.
Was there a lot of internal debate about this? We had heard that Secretary of State and Ivanka and Jared were on one side, and there was a battle, Steve Bannon on the other. Can you characterize?
All of that, I think, is just simply, again, legend. What happened in this process is what happens with every decision the president makes. He had advisors around him informing, equipping, helping him make a decision. The debate was good and strong and meaningful amongst all voices, and the president made an informed decision. Everyone did their role, and it was something that I'm very proud of the president today.
Finally, if somebody looks at this and says, wow, we are stepping away from our environmental leadership.
We lead through action, not words. Look at what we've done. From 2000 to 2014 in reduction. Look what we've done. We're at pre-1994 levels in our CO2 footprint. Why? Because of American innovation and technology, not because of government mandate.
Mr. Administrator, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Wall Street having a big day before the president's announcement. All three major indices posted record closes today. The Dow gained 136. The S&P 500 was up 18. The Nasdaq finished ahead 48. We're waiting tomorrow's release of May jobless figures. Today we learned applications for weekly aid rose slightly but stayed near historically low levels. President Trump says he likes what he's seeing.
The economy is starting to come back, and very, very rapidly. We've added $3.3 trillion in stock market value to our economy and more than 1 million private sector jobs.
Let's get some analysis tonight from Fox Business Network's Trish Regan in New York. Good evening, Trish. You know, there seems to be this optimism in the markets. And I know this was the Paris Accord situation was done after the markets closed, but did the Paris Accord move factor in? We knew it was going to happen, essentially. Did this jump have more to do with expectations for tomorrow's job numbers?
I think it's a combination. I would point out that the market had been down earlier in this session, but then rallied back up rather significantly, managing to close at new highs on the Dow, the S&P, and the Nasdaq. So I think that's important in that you're going to hear a lot of hysteria. We've already heard some of it, and we're going to hear more of it tomorrow from many members of the left that feel very strongly this was a bad decision for our economy, a bad decision for our country. And I would point people back to the markets once again, because we are not seeing the same kind of hysteria amongst investors that you're hearing among political types. And I think that's important because, above all, we need our economy to fare better. We need to move forward in terms of job creation, in terms of GDP growth. And you can tell from the market that they are not that worried about not being in the accord.
Yeah, and also about where the agenda is. Republicans have not pushed this through yet, obviously legislatively, and there's some doubt about that. Healthcare, tax reform, still a ways to go, yet the market's closing at record highs. Where's the connection?
I think that people are very optimistic right now. And look, these things have to happen. They got to get tax reform through. That's very important for these markets. But I will tell you, there is a sense of optimism right now in America and among American business leaders that we haven't quite seen, at least in some time, Brett. And I do think that what you hear out of the Oval Office helps to set that tone, regardless of what you may think about Donald Trump in some capacities. I think from an economic policy standpoint, there are many people in business that feel he is on the right track. He's got to get there, but he's on the right track, and perhaps his willingness to pull out of the accord was to them more evidence of that.
We will see. Trish, as always, thank you. We'll be back for the jobs numbers tomorrow. 11 Trump administration staff members have received ethics waivers. The list includes White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and Counselor Kellyanne Conway. The waivers allow the employees to participate in government duties that may overlap with their previous private sector jobs. The administration putting that out today.